Session 43. Good evening. This can be for the record or you may delete it. Ralph said, yes. They said, I told Rupert that he wasn't pregnant. So now I expect that our sessions will be a little smoother again now that he is relieved of the big question. I must say that his discipline was admirable, and that I myself gave him much aid. The sessions themselves have helped Rupert develop discipline. I am pleased that our practical exercises outside of class, so to speak, are coming along so well. For one thing, our Rupert is a Doubting Thomas from way back, and evidence of the inner senses that are expressed outside of our sessions help along these lines. I do not want gullible ninnies, however, I certainly would enjoy being taken at my word occasionally. Though the shock might be too much for even my constitution, I hope, Joseph, that you will also experience more of the inner senses. You certainly should. Ralph asked, how about my dream of the tree branch falling? Any connection there with the inner senses? They said, the dream of the tree? I do not know if it was merely a dream or not at this point. It was not the same sort of experience as the other you had in connection with a tree. I simply do not know if that particular limb will fall within a specific time. You may have seen it ultimately falling, but this was not the same kind of experience as Rupert's seeing the clock. Rupert was right. We shall call the eighth inner sense the sense of disentanglement, and it is one of the most basic inner senses. Complete disentanglement comes rarely on your plane, although it is possible to achieve it with training. Variations occur, but usually some remnant of camouflage data is retained. Even here, there are gradations. Consider again, Rupert in one room with his eyes closed, seeing the time by a clock in the other room. The clairvoyance is of the easier variety, and yet represents an important step in his development, and should in your own. He was concerned with a camouflage idea, that of time and clock time at that, the clock itself being a camouflage. Clairvoyantly, he merely disentangled himself enough to ignore some camouflage in order to perceive camouflage that lay behind it, and this is a necessary first step. Even for example, levitation is involved with camouflage to a large degree, in that the camouflage physical body itself rises. But we are still here using the camouflage physical form. Traveling without the camouflage physical form is a giant step, of course, but a possible one according to your development. Here, you are traveling, however, through camouflage space. It is very difficult on your level to do without any camouflage, and yet it can be done. And here again, the use of psychological time is extremely important, since when psychological time is utilized to its fullest extent, then camouflage becomes lessened to an almost astounding degree. I am not going to give you any lessons for levitation, any more than I gave Rupert lessons in clairvoyance. Your own development and your own rate of assimilation will be the rule. as far as the movement of camouflage objects through camouflage space is concerned. Again, you are dealing with camouflage. You move camouflage objects through the use of your inner senses constantly without your own conscious knowledge. The trick is not to learn how, but to recognize the occurrence, and with practice this is possible. I must say that I am somewhat of an old reprobate myself, at least enough to enjoy Rupert's spring-like attire. Like Rupert, I enjoy the wild wind, and there were many nights when we three walked down Spring Street together. Rob asked, "In Boston?" They said, "In Denmark and in other places. I suggest you take your break before you break me up." They said, "The universe is expanding in the way that a dream expands. In other words, this expansion has nothing to do with your idea of space. The expansion, in a most basic manner, is more like the expansion of an idea. It has nothing to do with space or time in the manner in which you are accustomed to think of them. I told you earlier that your scientist's idea of an expanding universe was in error, although, in one important sense, the universe was expanding, and this is what I referred to. Your own dream world expands constantly. Your ideas expand constantly, but your ideas have nothing to do with space. And the manner in which the universe constantly expands has nothing to do with your idea of space. True space, fifth-dimensional space, has abilities of expansion that do not need space. Not in your terms. There is no method of measurement at your command to enable you to ascertain exactly what I am referring to. Yet perhaps this will make it somewhat understandable. I will use Joseph, an example having to do with your own profession. Take two paintings of the same shape and size. That is, two paintings that take up the same amount of space in your universe. One painting is extremely crude and poorly done. The other painting not only seems of superior quality, but also appears to undergo a continual transformation while still taking up the same amount of space. Say that the painting is a landscape, and that this transformation includes within the same amount of space the additional continually of more trees, more hills. Let the hills still within the same amount of space allotted to the painting grow taller, and yet never shoot past the frame. Imagine this transformation including also the addition of distance, reaching ever further backward, while not disturbing the backside of the canvas. Imagine, if you can, the figures or inhabitants in the painting having psychological reality, all within the set limits prescribed by the given space. Imagine, in other words, consciousness, growth, reality, and expansion, having nothing to do with expansion of space in your terms, but an almost complete freedom of psychological realities. And you will come at least within the range of understanding what I mean by an expanding universe that has nothing to do with the expanding universe of which your scientists speak. Most realities have absolutely nothing to do with space, as you imagine it. Most realities have their growth and existence in something closely akin to what we have called psychological time, and this is completely independent of space, as you conceive it to be. Psychological time is a sort of climate or environment conducive to the existence of all consciousness. You think of space as an emptiness to be filled because on your plane, you fill what you call space with camouflage patterns. And I repeat, instead true space, fifth-dimensional space, is the vitality and stuff of all existence itself, vital and alive, from which all other existences are woven through means which I have outlined so far in a rather sketchy fashion. Even on your plane quality, which represents a kind of expansion, does not necessarily imply an expansion of space. The universe expands continually in a qualitative manner that has nothing to do with space as it is usually envisioned. And the expansion is more vivid and valid than I can possibly explain to you at this time. I suggest a brief break. We managed to get some excellent material through so far, for which I am most thankful, and the quality of the material just given transcended your time and space. The expansion of quality in this case existing independently. The walls of the room do not push back to receive a great idea, for example, and again, the expansion of the universe from the inside does not imply a pushing out or an inflation. Before I answer the question that you voiced during break, Joseph, let me continue first along the lines of our discussion. Again, the dream world, which is a very vivid one and a valid one, does not take up any space at all. It is all free to be a very large degree of your physical time, but it does not exist in the climate or environment of psychological time. You certainly cannot pinpoint a dream location, even if the location corresponds to a familiar one in the camouflage universe. The dream itself is not experienced in the specific camouflage location. The body lies in its bed, though you recognize in a dream the complete furnishings of an actual house. Still the dreamer lies in his bed. The two locations, the dream location and the camouflage location, appear the same, but they are not the same. One takes up space in your universe, and the other does not. The universe expands in the manner that a dream expands, taking up no camouflage space. This does not mean that there is no growth involved in the expansion of the universe. This does not imply that there is no movement. It simply implies an existence and an expansion of a qualitative manner, beyond your present measurements or complete comprehension. The most full operation of the inner senses is possible only in this climate. There is so much here that I am impatient to tell you, and so little that you can understand now. Conceptions explode into being, evolve, change into something else, and yet all this within a framework that is definite, but cannot be seen or touched by you. The psychological expansion, even of atoms and molecules, that in themselves contain condensed comprehensions beyond your understanding. The stuff of the universe is not inanimate, nor even on your plane is it an emptiness to be filled, but constantly expanding in ways that you cannot yet fathom. Even as Rupert looked out the window, simply through empty space at the street, the so-called space simply is not empty, though Through the specialized camouflage senses, it may appear to be empty. Your outer senses merely equipped you to perceive your own camouflage. But to others, your camouflage may in some cases appear as empty space, while what is empty to you is filled with activity for them. Your scientist's idea of an expanding universe is so dependent upon your own limited theories that it becomes very difficult to make the matter plain. Again, I entreat you to practice with the use of psychological time, for here, the inner senses are given the greatest freedom from camouflage, and experiencing the resulting inner expansion, you will perhaps come somewhat closer to the ideas involved in our real expanding universe. The dream analogy is also very helpful here, and I suggest that you read it carefully. As far as Rupert's fat hands and your own are concerned, this is in a very limited manner a hint of the qualities of extension that can be expected. This is of an entirely different kind of experience, having nothing to do with our discussion immediately previous. This extension involves a reaching out of tissue capsule. The degree is rather limited, the opposite experience being one of contraction. This can be compared most clearly to a pulsation, or really a beat that can follow a more or less regular rhythm. It involves the inner self and the tissue capsule which also surrounds the physical camouflage body in a manner, and for a purpose which I have briefly explained in an earlier session. I suggest that you take a break. Briefly, let me mention that transportation in the universe, that is, transportation as such, is basically unnecessary. This is only a preliminary statement for other sessions, and I will not go into it deeply at this time. When or by the time that transportation difficulties are solved, you will no longer need transportation. Use of the inner senses makes transportation as you think of it completely unnecessary. Since complete use of the inner senses amounts to communication to a degree so near perfect and so independent of so-called space, that transportation through space in those terms becomes an outmoded method of communication. The inner senses provide their own transportation, and put that in quotes. Transportation as such is valid only within a space framework and within a time concept, such as those on your own plane. The transportation, in quotes, of the inner senses consists mainly of what you might call a changing of frequencies or vibrations or pulsations, a transformation of vitality form from one particular pattern or aspect to another. The movement through space is a distortion. I expect to say much more about this in further sessions, as it is extremely important. And you can see now, perhaps why our eighth sense, disentanglement, is so important, since the inner self must disentangle itself from a particular camouflage before it can change. It must ignore, so to speak, one set of camouflage and be able to either adopt another smoothly or to dispense with camouflage entirely. The grouping of inner senses with which we are now concerned deal with the disentanglement of one set of camouflage patterns and the taking up of another set. The groupings of inner senses most dependent upon the use of psychological time are those which involve a nearly complete disentanglement from camouflage pattern, without taking on other patterns, and these are perhaps the most important, because they come closer to the direct experience of unveiled reality. In some ways, you see, your dream world is actually much closer to the direct experience of reality than is your waking world, where the operation of the inner senses is shielded so from your own awareness. This is not to say that the dream world is more important to you in your present situation, merely that it contains more truth about the source of your own existence. You will find that we have covered some excellent points here this evening that will be most helpful in further discussions. There are other facets that I will take up, but at a later time. I am looking forward to summer discussions. Maybe Rupert will even wear a bathing suit. Rob said, maybe. They said, again, let me mention that you in particular, Joseph, had a much more pleasant winter than you would have enjoyed without the knowledge of your own present personality gained from our sessions. I suggest you take a brief break. The pulsating that I mentioned earlier as extension and contraction involves the use of certain frequencies inherent in the tissue capsule, and to some small degree represents or is a limited aspect of the ability of the inner self to change frequencies and pulsations in an even freer, less limited manner. I wanted to make this point earlier. Rupert's experience with the slip of paper represented a clairvoyance, as did his experience with the clock. The clairvoyance is concerned with camouflage pattern. Telepathy, for example, is not. In further experiences of this kind, Rupert will be able to see, in quotes, more as his ability grows. The piece of paper was, as he saw it, written in the hand of Urusha Piri. It was on a desk. The notation mentioned your name, along with other names of artists whose works were under consideration by that woman to be placed in business offices. The notation was on a desk in the woman's apartment, and Rupert had not seen it, and was not familiar with it in the ordinary fashion. I will not go into this any more deeply now, because your name was involved, Joseph. Rupert saw, in quotes, the slip of paper, and he was not able to read the rest of it simply because your name was not mentioned again, and there was no further information on the paper, merely names, and he had no more emotional incentive. I hope that you will develop along these lines, but the rate of progress is of course up to you, and your individual abilities will vary as to particulars. This is to be expected. As a rule, the use of psychological time will help you both develop in a fairly balanced manner. I have enjoyed this evening's session. After some more material with our inner senses, perhaps we shall take some time out to go into your various life readings, as I have let them go to get other material to you. Incidentally, though I promised, didn't I, that I wouldn't meddle, I do think that your idea, camping weekends during the summer, is an excellent one, and also that you have made a good decision as far as artistic is concerned, particularly in that you request more money. You have to be able to afford all the paper to record our sessions. Ralph said, Right. They said, Joking aside, you will no longer feel put upon as artistic, and perhaps you can see now that it would have been perfectly acceptable to have made your demand for more money at a much earlier date, since the demand was certainly justified for value received. May I rejoice with you? You may put this in the record or not. You will not have children, for reasons that I have explained. It is possible within the range of free will, but not probable. And now, my dear friends, I wish you a fond and even joyful good evening. Ralph said, and the same to you, Seth. They said, As always I dislike leaving you. But after Rupert paces up and down and utters my monologue steadily for such long periods of time, and after you scribble away my immortal words so furiously, then I know that you must be glad for a rest. Ralph asked, What are you going to do now, after you leave us? Ralph noted, This is another question I like to throw at Seth, and is another one he has yet to answer. They said, I am not going to do what you are going to do. I will discuss my comings and goings, if not to your complete satisfaction, at least enough to quiet you for a while, but at a later date. Ralph said, Oh. They said, Perhaps we will take a good part of a session for it. Ralph said, That sounds good. They said, And in the meantime bear with me. I will say that some of your camouflages are utterly delightful, and sometimes when I return in some way I yearn again for spring and warm windy weather. Ralph said, Good night, Seth.